The GSA has awarded $212,000 to 106 students to attend a field camp of their choosing, funded by corporate donors. When that support ended, as you know, a lot of the corporate sponsors are having difficult times as well. So when that ended, the GSA Foundation began raising funds from individual donors to continue these scholarships and has given an additional $88,000 to 44 more students, thanks to many of you. Last year, this program was named the J. David Lowell Field Camp Scholarship Program, and we'll hear from George now about this significant development to endow the program.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for everyone for participating today. I was pleased to have been a member of the GSA Futures Campaign Committee, especially because of the strong commitment on the part of that campaign to field geology as expressed through field camp scholarship support. And as a member of the committee, I decided early on that I would attempt to seek a major gift from J. David Lowell, Dave Lowell, whose phenomenal career in copper discovery was really based on serious, creative, sustained field work. I mean, just for starters, he found more copper than anyone in history. In his autobiography, he notes that he himself, somehow he said this humbly, was responsible for the discovery of 10 major ore deposits. And then he identifies 6 others that for which he was part of the discovery effort, collaborating with others. His special knack was identifying porphyry copper deposits, ones that were beheaded, that is, cut off by faults. And he used forensics of all types to find the offset parts based upon fault geometry and displaced alteration patterns. His approach was to consider everything, and he seemed to have a delight in dealing with messy systems because he felt that that's where opportunities would be found. I had the privilege of knowing Dave when I was department head in geosciences at the University of Arizona. He agreed to be my one-person development committee. That was probably the best decision I ever made. And then when I was provost, the College of Science nominated him for an honorary doctoral degree, and I was on stage, 10,000 people there, and I hooded Dave for his honorary degree, and he had his game face on, and I whispered to him, "Don't let this go to your head, Dave," and then he just beamed, you know, big smile, and the students loved it. And then he asked me several times to help out with some structural puzzles, and that's where I saw him in action on the ground with his game face on. It turns out the time frame in laying a proper foundation for the Lowell gift was on the order of 18 months. And during that period of time, early on, GSA and the foundation and a few of us really tried to come up with some creative ideas regarding what would appeal to Dave's practical sensibilities. And we thought about, and we still think about it from time to time, to have a kind of a capstone specialized camp that deals with economic geology in ore deposits geology. And we thought about the possibility of creating a situation where colleagues from industry who have had a lot of field experience would find a way to become part of field camp programs around the nation. And in this way, perhaps add to the curriculum in ways that would provide the development of some applied exercises. And we thought this would appeal to Dave's practical philosophy. And then one of the smart things I did was call upon Pete Rowley, retired from USGS. Pete and I go way back. The two of us actually conspired to help GSA create a mapping award. And Pete went all out in contacting colleagues from US Geological Survey, as well as state surveys. I did some reaching out as well to colleagues in academia primarily. And we put together a compendium of the input regarding why field geology is important from true believers. And this turned out to be an extremely important document that Dave read extremely carefully. And it made a difference to him that we had reached out to lay a foundation for broad giving. But then one day I decided it's time to make an ask. You know, that's the big tipping point. And at that point I said, let's just keep it simple. I said that to myself. You know, the fundamental need is scholarship support to enable more students to attend field camp. I mean, that's what it's about. So I emailed Dave one morning and I said, you know, is there any way that I can visit you in your home once again to talk about this? And I'd like to present two opportunities, Dave. One, for $50,000, establishing a GSA J. David Lowell Field Camp Scholarship, or a second opportunity, a $500,000 gift to establish the GSA's J. David Lowell Field Camp Program, into which scholarships and giving in the future would be applied. Well, the next day he emailed back and he said, I like the bigger number. I mean, that was the best email I think I've ever received. And then he said, you don't have to come over. We can do this over the phone. Well, soon we were on the phone. If anybody knows Dave Lowell besides me, and I know a bunch of you do, he pressed me for 30 minutes, but then said, okay, let's do it. I can get the money into GSA in a couple of weeks. So as I pulled myself off the floor, or it might have been the ceiling, I indicated to him that I would intend to contact Jack Hess immediately so that he can call you and thank you. And Dave says to me, he's got better things to do than that. And I said something like that, if he thinks that's the case, he's in the wrong job. Well, of course, Jack called him right away. So what we love about Dave's gift, it comes from a person whose career represents devotion to field relationships as the primary sources for impactful ideas. His life underscores what can happen when you pay attention to outcrops and maps, including impacts to economies of nations and to universities, such as the School of Mines he established in Peru. GSA will communicate to every student recipient the story of Dave's dedication and accomplishments. So it's important to know the geologist behind the person for whom the program is named. And GSA-F, the foundation, will keep alive the humility with which Dave gave the gift, communicating this fact not only to the student recipients, but to others who step forward in supporting their own named field camp scholarship or in giving in any way to this program. So that brings us to, you know, what will field camp look like in the future? We all know, we're now experts on hearing COVID-19 is accelerating history, and we see it all around us. We see it in field camps. We see the development of virtual field camps during crisis last spring, and the execution of those camps during the summer. We want overall potential contributors to be assured that the Lowell program carries language that provides resilience and sustainability. GSA requires this of itself if it wishes as a society to continue to lead as an advocate for field-intensive research and discovery. So the language we developed, which embraces the future, reads, college and university curriculum and the pedagogy of teaching change and evolve over the decades. We recognize that new and modified forms of field-based training and engagement will be part of the future. For example, approved mentor internships initiated through private or government sector organizations, such as exploration companies, consulting firms, state and federal geological surveys. Thus, the program fund shall not be restricted to supporting students in traditional field camp settings, although this, in all probability, will be the major investment. The program fund will be reviewed every 10 years to determine the range of field training experience for which program fund scholarships can be appropriately distributed. Accordingly, the purposes of the program fund may be expanded or contracted with the concurrence of the GSA executive director and the donor, or their respective successors of interest, if any. So that's the story, that's the background, and that's the framework which in part we're using to see if we can build the fund further. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Any questions for George while we're here? You just bring up your video and unmute. He's willing to answer anything we have.
You bet. This is the hard part of Zooming, right?
Finding the buttons.
Not finding the buttons, but feeling like we're all together, you know, around a big table.
All right, with that, let's move on to Miriam, University of Missouri.
Yes, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I am the director of the University of Missouri Geology Field Camp, and I've been on that role for 11 years now. I'm trying to share my screen. The struggle is real. Cliff, you may have to work some magic again. It's not letting, ooh, you're a dear. Perfect, thank you so much. Technology. All right, hopefully everybody can see a screen that's not my face, which is always a positive. So what follows is not a tale about the University of Missouri Field Camp, but really the story of many tens of geology field camps across the US. In 1910, Edwin B. Branson was a newly appointed geology professor at the University of Missouri. He believed that hands-on experience was the key to learning about the Earth. And for his students to get that experience, Branson began organizing a summer field camp. He decided that an area near Lander, Wyoming, which he had become acquainted through through his PhD that he did at the University of Chicago, he decided that was the ideal location for such an endeavor. And 10 students made up the first field camp class in 1911, and here they are trudging through the snow in the Wind River Mountains, looking like what I imagine George Mallory would look like some 15 years later when attempting to conquer Everest. These early field camp students were sized up by the locals as the rock hounds from back east, which being from Missouri back east, that's kind of hilarious, but you know. And in about 3 decades, however, it is certain that these people would become the life of the party in many ways, more than one. So tents at the beginning, right in the early 1910s, tents and kerosene lamps were the thing, and then those soon gave way to small cabins. And over 2 decades, most of the camp's cabins were actually built, and they were built mostly by student volunteers who were compensated with summer board or room on board. And the construction of the cabins was high tech as it gets. And it was highly supervised by very knowledgeable geology faculty members, because that's how we roll. When you don't have any money, you build it yourself. And so our camp was essentially born, in a sense. Through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we added water and sewage facilities and electricity. And again, the University of Missouri Field Camp and tens of others, just like ours in those decades, we were on a roll, right? We were ready to go. Field geology was a thing. So for over 100 years, really, geology students from across all of our country have flocked to summer geology field camps, many of them out west. Now, for many of us who teach geology in the Midwest, you know, when we try to find rocks around here, this is what we look at. And so probably the explanation of why geology field camps migrated out west has something to do with this. Students really have attended field camps over 100 years because as a community of students and teachers, as a community of aspiring academics and professional geologists, as a community of employers and future employees, as a community of geoscientists, we all firmly believe that the best geologists are probably those who see the most rocks. We probably also believe that earth science is by definition a field science, and that geoscientists will be making professional decisions based on field observations, and that field training, it's kind of essential in our education as geoscientists. We really, as a community, believe that field camp is the ideal setting for our students to put the knowledge and skills they have acquired over multiple years to the test. Field camp is our community's crucible. Field camp is our rite of passage. Some of our students, some of my own students have come to say field camp is the most fun you never want to have again. And the teaching in our field camps really has certainly evolved over the years. Now, some schools, some field camps have created specific field experiences or field camps dedicated to particular specializations. Some, like our own in Missouri, we have added curricular expertise in areas such as surface and groundwater hydrogeology, shallow subsurface geophysics, or even basin analysis. Even those field camps that remain more traditional, for which mapping is the core of their curriculum, they have managed to incorporate ways to expose their students to different aspects of geology that serve as introductions to perhaps potential job directions. Technology, of course, has made its way into our field camps, traditional and not so much. And our field camps really look a little bit different from what they did even 15 years ago. Field camps really and field education will, and I hope that as a field geologist, continue to be relevant for as long as we, as a community of geoscientists, continue to see the value of a field experience as a key aspect of geoscience education. If we don't believe in what we're doing, in whichever way is that we are doing what we're doing, then there will be no point in continue doing it. If we believe in field teaching and field education, it will continue to happen. And that's really, it's all I've got, folks. Thank you very much. I am going to try to extract myself out of this. So if you can stop the share, Cliff, that'll be great.
Thank you, Miriam. That was great. Any questions for Miriam? If you have a question, go ahead and bring up your video and unmute, and we'll acknowledge you. Yes, Wes.
Did I see, Miriam, in the 1936 photograph that women were attending field camp?
Sorry, that came out a little bit cut out. What was something about 1936?
Did I see women as field camp attendees in that slide? That
You certainly did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have several shots of very glamorous looking ladies attending field camp in 1936, yes. We actually, our field camp had women attending in as early as 1913. I also have images of women attending field camp in 1913.
Wow, that's great. Anyone else? Okay, with that, let's move on to Michael.
Hey, Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty, I'll just go ahead then. My name is Michael Hannah Wilson. I'm here to talk a little bit about my experience with Indiana University's virtual field camp this past summer. As George was talking about earlier, COVID has really changed. It really made a lot of people not able to go to field camp this past summer. And I guess looking forward, we're going to see, at least I think, there's going to be a lot more virtual field camps like the one that I went to at Indiana University. When I started my undergraduate geology career, I had no intention or no idea that, my senior capstone, my field camp, would be a virtual experience. When I started, I was excited by the prospect of being able to go on field camps in a wide variety of locations, and I had lots of different options of different sub-disciplines I could go for. I was excited by possibly being able to go to Italy maybe and study geology in the Dolomites, or do a field camp in Morocco and study geology in the Atlas Mountains, or do a volcanology field camp in wherever. So I kind of, my entire undergraduate geology career, I was kind of like, oh yeah, like when I get to my senior year and it's time to take do a field camp, I'm gonna have lots of options, and it's gonna be fun. I'm gonna be out in the wilderness somewhere in the world and doing geology, the thing I love most, for 5 weeks or 6 weeks. In July of 2019, actually, George Davis, who you heard from earlier, I was able to do field work with him. He invited me to be his research assistant, and we spent 10 days up in Moab, up in the Paradox Basin, doing structural geology research. So we were taking strike and dip measurements all day and taking slick and line measurements all day, and I loved it. And it just made me even more excited to, think, oh, a year from now in July of 2020, I'll be doing this for a month. I'll be doing strike and dip measurements all day, and it just reinforced my excitement for field camp. And so between July of 2019, when we went to Moab, and the following summer, when I was planning on going to field camp, of course, COVID-19 happened. And, when it was first starting, I was still thinking I was probably going to go on a in-person field camp. And, I was thinking, okay, we're doing classes online now, because right now it's March and I'm thinking ahead a few months. So I'm thinking kind of, okay, in a few months, this whole COVID-19 business is going to be, settled down, and I'll be able to, go to field camp somewhere in the world maybe. And so, I was still looking at possible, camps to apply to. And come May or so this year, my advisor emailed me and let me know that, I should start considering a virtual experience, a virtual camp. And, I'll be honest, like I wasn't too excited about the idea of going to a virtual field camp. I felt that, before I went, I was thinking like, virtual field camp, that's kind of like an oxymoron, kind of like. So I had my doubts going in. It's not something that I was, it's not what I had been expecting to go to do for the years before when I was an undergrad. But I applied. went in with an open mind. Right now, I will say that now looking back, my virtual field camp experience was extremely valuable, and I learned much more than I expected going in. I was really surprised by the camp that Indiana University put together in what I imagine was a very short amount of time. It was 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks, I believe, the same length as their normal field camp. And the way it worked was every week we were studying a different location within Montana or Wyoming. So a different anticline or a different fault zone or whatever it was. And what they did was, in the field location of the week, they had taken, in some places, I think probably over 100 videos at different points of interest in that area. So different outcrops or different along different faults. And they had people on the ground there taking these videos, and they kind of described, these are the rocks we're seeing, this is what it looks like. Here's the fossils that are present. They gave us tons of information and tons of photographs to kind of put us in the shoes, I guess put us on the ground as much as they can without actually having us there in the field. And so we were able to put together an idea of what this area looked like and what the geology was like from our bedrooms, from our computer screens. And they really did an amazing job at getting all the important details and taking tons of video. And so we were able to take what they told us from the videos out in the field and the photographs and put that onto Google Earth and construct a map on Google Earth. And so I like to think that, they were teaching us field skills because they're teaching us, they're showing us what we saw or what they saw, and we had to make our own interpretation. So we had to kind of like think three-dimensionally because, they saw this over here and they saw this over here. So we got to kind of figure out what's in between. But we also learned more modern skills, like how to use Google Earth satellite imagery to make a map and to look with satellite imagery what the ground looks like, to see if we can see formations going through the area. So I feel really fortunate that I was able to learn, or I guess kind of hone field skills, as well as use more modern skills at the same time. And, I could go on and on with, the new things I learned at the virtual field camp that I could use in the field. But I guess in conclusion, I feel that Indiana University's virtual field camp experience was extremely rewarding, extremely valuable. It's not what I expected, but it's something I'm very glad I got. And like I said before, I don't know if there's any undergrad students here listening, but if you have to consider a virtual field camp experience, I would say to an undergrad in that position to not be scared, to keep an open mind and be prepared to learn a lot, because I did. I think the way that COVID's looking right now, I think a lot of students are going to have to consider a virtual field camp experience. But yeah, in conclusion, I had a great time at Indiana University's field camp and learned a lot. Learned so much that, you know, I feel at least that I could use in the field and with research on the computer using Google Earth and spreadsheets and stuff that I didn't know before. And I find that extremely valuable. It was an extremely valuable experience.
Thank you, Michael. I'm
Thank
sure
you,
there's
Jeff.
some questions for Michael.
Hey, Michael, this is George Davis. Did it get hot in your computer office as it was in Moab in July when we worked there?
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't as hot in my bedroom as it was those 10 days in Moab.
I recruited Michael Hannah Wilson in part because he grew up in Yuma. I said, he's going to be ready for the Moab summer. Either one of us was ready for the Moab summer.
Hey, Michael, this is Debbie. I'm not sure if you're seeing it, but there's a question there in the chat about how did the Indiana instructors create a sense of community amongst the students? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, every day there were discussion boards where people could ask questions and students could talk to each other. You know, so with those discussion boards, at least, they, you know, that was one of the only interactions between students. But I definitely did feel that, you know, the students were there and I could call on other people in my class for help if I needed to. You know, definitely you're not going to be able to get the same sense of camaraderie or community as you would in a in-person field camp. But I did feel with those discussion boards and the Zoom meetings that we did together, because every day there were Zoom meetings as well, I did feel that I was part of a class and, you know, that there were other geologists there and doing the same stuff that I was doing. So discussion boards and Zoom meetings. Hi, you're muted actually.
Hi, Margaret.
So it's not a Zoom meeting unless somebody says, you're on mute, right? I'm really curious. Just as an aside, I was actually 1980. I was one of the alumni at Camp Branson with the University of Missouri. I was at Florida State and was able to get on that camp, and it was transformative and amazing and wonderful. So thank you, Miriam. It was awesome. I had Jack Sharp as my our co-lead for the camp, and it was amazing. But I just want to ask, for the virtual field camp, for you, what was probably the biggest takeaway? What was the thing you liked the most? And since we're all in this new world of virtual field camps, what would be the thing you would probably change or want to add to an experience if you were to do it again, or perhaps give your own virtual field trip?
I think the thing that the most valuable takeaway, in my opinion, was the way they had us using a lot of Google Earth satellite images to help us make the maps. Like they taught us how to identify a continuous unit by looking at the different coloration of the ground on the satellite images. And they showed us like, okay, look at this unit, how it goes along the study area and then it stops abruptly. So there's a fault here, whatever it is. So I felt that, kind of the more high-tech stuff, the more modern stuff that they taught us, like using Google Earth to make a map, was one of the more valuable things. Because I feel like this is, because the research I do with George Davis, we use Google Earth all the time to overlay geologic maps on different areas in the Paradox Basin. So that was stuff that I'd used before and stuff that, and a skill that was honed by the Indiana Field Camp. So it was kind of like, wow, I'm already using this for real, and now I'm learning how to do it better. And then since then, I've actually used some skills that I learned in the Indiana Field Camp to help with the research I do with George Davis. And I guess as for changes to the camp, honestly, I think the Indiana people, the Indiana folks, they put out the best product they could with the time and the constraints they had. So I really can't think of anything that I would change. I think everything was very smooth the way they did it. I think they did a very fine job. I would have to think hard, I guess, to find something I would change.
Michael, there's another question in the chat for you, asking if you were team mapping or creating a map solo.
Okay. It was all solo mapping. So I never got a chance to see anyone else's map, which I have to imagine is probably a pretty big difference between a virtual camp and an in-person camp, because I imagine in an in-person camp you get to see everybody else's maps and kind of exchange ideas. No, at the Indiana virtual camp, it was all individual work, solo work. Well, maybe that's something I would actually change. Maybe add in an opportunity for people to exchange ideas and kind of maybe have some exercises where there are some team mapping exercises. But no, for this one it was all solo.
Michael, this is Dave Jackie. Was interested in your sort of looking at this, given that you had some history with George in terms of being out in the field. Can you comment anything about the other students in the class and how maybe not having that field experience beforehand would have changed their approach to field camp and how that fits? And also in terms, I did field camp a very long time ago with aerial photos and things like that. There was a single shot. And so it strikes me, I'm very interested in how you're using Google Earth, because you do have a series of pictures over the years that you can use too. And so I think that's a very great addition. But I guess I'm interested in encouraging that in part your field experience did help you and that was part of the picture. So thanks. It was a very interesting thing to hear.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the research I had done with George was really helpful, because a lot of the stuff we were doing at the Indiana camp was stuff I had done before too. I learned lots of new stuff, but also had done lots of stuff I'd done with George, like a lot of the Google Earth stuff.
Michael, there's another question from Mindy. Given your virtual experience, if you could go back to physical in-person field mapping, is there a digital tool or skill that you feel like you absolutely can't do without?
Um, hmm. Well, that's interesting because I guess I'm tempted to say Google Earth just because of how, I mean, it really is extremely useful in the stuff that I've been doing with George Davis because it allows you to see the, not only the satellite images, but, 3D terrain and kind of just like scroll around the terrain and explore the area. I would be interested. So I guess that would be the digital tool that I feel like I absolutely can't do without. But I guess in addition to that, I would love to do a field camp where I don't have that tool. So I could, I guess, learn everything 100% old school too. And kind of have a camp experience where I don't have the help of those digital tools and where I just have to just use three-dimensional thinking and publish geologic maps or maybe just aerial photos or something to make a map. So that it would be interesting for me to do a camp like that. Now that I've done a virtual camp, a fully virtual camp, now if I could do a fully non-virtual camp too.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. And I see a internship in your future as a TA for a field camp.
No, maybe someday.
Hi, Michael and everyone. I might have missed this because I was putting my toddler down for a nap as you were speaking. But my question has to do with actual equipment, so the opposite of digital equipment. Were you loaned a Brunton compass or a similar device? Was there any sort of hands-on method being taught while you were at home, somehow taking measurements of something while you were at home?
No. It was all, as far as strike and dip goes, using a Brunton compass. They had just given us all the strike and dip measurements in the given area, so there wasn't an opportunity to actually, I guess, use skills like that, actually taking measurements. So maybe that's something that I think that's something I'd like to see in a virtual field camp in the future is somebody trying to teach those skills to somebody on a computer. At least for this camp, I didn't have the opportunity to use like a Brunton compass at home or anything like that.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
There's another question in the chat from Wes asking if remote sensing tools like low altitude drones should become standard tools for teaching field work.
I think so. I think if people are using remote sensing drones or low altitude drones, to do research, I think it should be taught to our students to get them ready for the research that students might be doing in the future, because I have to imagine that low altitude drones are being used in research. So I think it's only fair to undergrad students to get a chance to use them, to I guess learn about them early, so they don't have to learn about them when they have to use them. So I think, yeah, they do have potential to be teaching tools in field work.
George, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Michael, all of us who have gone to in-person camp, field camp, know the flux of emotion that takes place over 5 or 6 weeks, where you're dealing with ambiguity and really difficult to interpret relationships. And there are times where you're cruising along. You can see relationships, you can see the continuity of formations of the type that you described that you saw on Google Earth. And then there's the crunch time, to prepare a report and try to pull everything together. What did it feel like to you, say, for example, relative to a normal academic course within a university? What were you at times glad you got a good night's sleep to try to resolve a problem that you hadn't been able to resolve the day before?
It was definitely more challenging than a lot of the classes I had taken before, just because of the amount of time we had to do each mapping project, as well as the level of detail that we needed on those mapping projects. So it was stressful. I imagine it's not as stressful as what you would get in a in-person field camp. But I guess compared to other classes I've taken, it was pretty. It was a lot of work. It was a challenge for me, I felt. And I did feel I was using skills I had learned throughout my entire undergrad career in the virtual.
It was a really capstone in that regard.
Yeah. Once again, I not as challenging as probably a in-person field camp would be, but still a challenge. And it was fun too. I enjoyed making the maps and solving the puzzles.
I think everyone here understands the value of field camp for sure, and of course the need is even more so than it has been in the past because of what's been going on with COVID. But we do have more time for questions for Michael, for Miriam, for George. Any questions are fair game.
So I have a question just for anybody in the group, actually. So you can tell by my uniform, I teach at the military academy, so we're like Army influence, and we get tons of funding to send students out on these things called staff rides, where they learn about history and military history and what commanders did in the field. And everybody understands that and understands how important it is. And so just money comes pouring in to send students on these staff rides. But I fight tooth and nail to get the permission and the funding to take my students out in the field for geology. So I'd be curious if anybody has like go-to references that more so than just anecdotal. I've loved it and I experience it, like effectiveness of field-based geoscience education. I'd love to get some input or some justification that could get the money to come rolling in from these old alumni.
Hi, Mindy. Thanks for your question. If you don't mind sharing with me your email, I can send you a load of references from the geoscience ed community, and you can take a deep dive. There's been multiple innumerable GSA sessions over the years in the annual meetings, GSA, the Geological Society of America, sessions on the importance of field teaching, not just from an anecdotal point of view, but true geoscience ed research. And we have multiple people attending now in this panel right here who have done some of that research. So if you, I can send you all the stuff. And many more people in this place can send you stuff. So just put your email in the box and we'll make sure you get it. And by the way, thank you for your service.
Harry asked in the chat if I was required to take field notes in a field notebook. in my virtual class. And to answer your question, Harry, yeah, we did. We had us like a, so I told you about in the study areas, they took like 100 videos at different locations. And so I found myself, as I was watching each video, taking notes in a notebook in just the same way as I would if I was out in Moab with George. I was saying, okay, this location, as I was watching the video, I was like, this location, these coordinates, rock unit, this, fossils, this, so on and so forth. So yeah, I did take field notes. Sarah Bremer just asked, how did you do rock descriptions? For a lot of the locations, they took photographs really close to the rock, so I was able to see rock class or fossils sometimes. So I just based my rock descriptions off of what I could see in the photo, as well as what they were describing in the videos.
Michael, it sounds like you started with the stratigraphic section in the first week or so, is that right? And then moved on from there, and then you were able to use the rock descriptions from that knowledge later when you're doing your mapping, is that right?
Yeah, we started off pretty early with talking about the rock units. So for each field location, before we started the actual mapping, we had an idea of what the rock units were in the area. Well, actually, we knew exactly what the rock units were in the area, and they kind of just they showed us pictures of the rock units and described the rock units to us. So, like when it came time to mapping near the end of the week, and they would be like, okay, at this location, I'm standing on top of a fossiliferous wax stone, and to my left is a arcosic sandstone. I could go back to the stratigraphic column I made and kind of see, oh, okay, so this must be whatever it is. But yeah, we learned the stratigraphy pretty early.
Okay,
Jeff,
George?
one of the things I'd like to say that just sort of popped into my mind would be distinguishing the explicit versus the implicit values that come out of field camp experiences. And, when we think about a formal in-person field camp environment, commonly we're talking about a number of faculty, maybe some graduate teaching assistants as well. We're talking about students who have entered that field camp from a number of different colleges and university settings. And amidst all of the directed efforts toward individual projects, like Missouri's project on Dallas Dome, doubly plunging anticline or something like that, there's a hell of a lot of other stuff that's taking place that faculty and students in some cases are hardly aware of. So for a junior taking field camp, it's a time of being receptive to what the future might hold, and an awareness that you need to take initiative as an individual student to help find that future. For example, identifying graduate schools or graduate advisors, or coming to grips with what your general tendencies might be in regard to your discipline of choice. And it goes on and on and on. So in some ways, field camp is not only a capstone in integrating explicit knowledge that comes from courses and putting it to use. But it's also a kind of a capstone with respect to college and university life for those who might be thinking of graduate education, might be thinking of going straight into industry. A lot of things are coming together. So even though I read to you earlier the versatility and the flexibility of the J. David Lowell program, including, mentored internships of the type that, as one example that Michael has referred to a number of times, what we did together in Utah, just the two of us, there's a lot of value that comes from being, and one of the questions reflected this earlier. I apologize for not remembering who asked the question. What about the community building and the collegiality and the discussion interaction that's taking place? That's really, really an important part of, let's call it, professional development of geoscientists, irrespective of whether they spend an ounce of time in the field in the future, following their undergraduate education.
Good points, George. Just wanted to let everybody know that there's already been $3,600 contributed so far today on Giving Tuesday to the field camp, specifically to the field camp scholarships.
Chris Pulaski from School Minds. I had maybe one exiting thought or idea is how do we convey to the future employers that, how do we share with them the virtues of a virtual camp, that they've got the nuts and bolts figured out and they can do this when they hit the boots on the outcrop in the future, when they hire them on.
And what School of Mines is that?
I'm at the South Dakota School of Mines, Rapid City. And my question is pretty much, how do we calm the fears of the future employers that the students have gone through a virtual camp, that they're going to be able to pull this off? They've got the nuts and bolts. They can do it.
I remember when I was a field camp director for about 5 years, and every spring there would be maybe a student or two who would come by my office and say, I think I've had the equivalent of geology field camp. And would you accept this as an equivalent? And what I would do, and I'm sure it sounds intimidating, but I think it's practical and useful, is to go out with a student in the field to some location that had geology that was reasonably akin to a geology field camp project, and provide that student with a map and with whatever, and have the map for a day. And I think that kind of applied, who would call it an opportunity, but I would call it an opportunity to demonstrate that you know your stuff, to the extent that you'll get the equivalent of 6 credit hours for a 5 or 6 week field camp experience. So it may well be that the employers may have to invest a little constructive time, in evaluating talent to probe a little bit to determine whether it's there. That's ad hominem, I guess. And you're reaching out for maybe maybe a more generalized body of information that basically says, hey, this works. That generalized body might not be available for a few more years until there have been more virtual camp experiences that have been completed.
Any other questions?
Hey, Jeff, I'd just say with regard to the employer thing that Chris was asking about, that, I mean, it's implicit for the employer to ask the right questions, right? I mean, one of the great values that you get from field camp is learning to think on your feet and being able to deal with a number of different situations. And so it really, Chris, I would, based on our experience teaching out there in Montana, you know, we just have to get them ready to be able to answer those tough questions that an employer is going to ask them with regard to different geologic situations. And so that has to be integrated into the virtual camp as well. Just having done a lot of interviewing in the past, so.
Great point, John. Good to see you too.
Good to see you, bud.
Yeah, just to echo John's comment and some other comments that have been mentioned through our really interesting conversation. One of the key points of I know our field camp is that students work in teams, and the teams rotate for every different project. Teams of 3-4 people, sometimes at the most, sometimes 2, and students are, you know, like John said, they need to think on their feet and they need to approach problem solving from a team perspective, a multidisciplinary team perspective. In this case, they are all geoscience students, but really they all come from different backgrounds. They don't know each other. They've known each other for a few days, you know, and that requires a whole new set of skills. Problem solving with people who are not your people. This is not your herd. These are not people that you've gone through school with. These are not people that you may feel necessarily comfortable with right off the bat. This is something that we all do in the professional world. And people in industry, people who are going to go into the more professional setting as geoscientists, they are going to encounter that, and they do so from the get-go. One of the first questions I get from any employer who calls my office asking me for, you know, whatever student of mine is asking for a job is, how are these people at problem solving? How are these people at working in teams? That question comes up every single time. And I think most of us who work at field camps, this is one of the things that we emphasize over and over again. Students hate it. I cannot even tell you how many course evaluations I get at the end saying, I hate working in groups. I work much better alone. Well, that's not how the real world works. And so that's why we emphasize it so much. And yeah, that's something that virtual field camps are going to be the way of the future. A big if, then we must pay attention to as well. It's not just uniquely about field geology, although that is a huge component, obviously, because geology is a field science, but how we approach problem solving in geoscience, it's also a very particular thing that we do, I suppose, in our discipline. Thank you.
Good point, Miriam. One of the another point that was made by one of the other attendees is it seems like virtual setting may actually be promising for people with disabilities or for other reasons cannot attend, social, economic, etc. Of course, that's why we're here, to try to help everyone be able to attend if they have that desire. Go ahead, David.
So I would emphasize that for the collaboration sort of aspects, that, you know, broad collaborations across the world are a very good thing, and that this field camp operation does encourage that. So that's an advantage of the virtual field camp. On the other hand, I guess thinking about the descriptions that Michael had, I'm a little bit concerned that a virtual field camp will spoon feed students the information about the rocks and this and that that is going to have to be something that we keep in mind as we develop things. You know, how do you really think for yourself, and how do you discover for yourself and have an argument on the outcrop is a good thing for geology too. So you know, I see a real advantage in the virtual stuff. I work virtually with a lot of people, and that's good, and that's a good skill. But that on the rock sort of looking at things is the other aspect that I think is essential. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Jeff, I'd add one more thing that has struck me in the last few years is teaching as just basically a summer instructor. And that being that I'm amazed and impressed by the number of students that ask me for letters of recommendation just based on the time we spent in the field. And I asked them, well, we've just had these 5 weeks together. And they say, yeah, but I've gotten more time and more attention with you than I have with any of my professors during my rest of my undergraduate career. And so I think that to me, what that spells is not necessarily something to field camp so much, but and it's amplified by the COVID situation, the virtual situation, is how do we reach out and effectively make these students feel comfortable coming to us as instructors and enhance those relationships where they feel comfortable asking for a letter of recommendation with confidence that the instructor or the professor is giving them a knowledgeable recommendation. Anyway, I mean, it's a little bit tangential, but I think it also speaks to the value that George was talking about earlier. It was just the bonding and the teamwork that is developed in field camp. The crisis situation and the full immersion and how that develops relationships. For what it's worth, anyway.
Very good, John. I think we probably need to close unless any other comments on virtual versus hands-on. It's a great discussion for sure. As a matter of fact, anybody interested will be continuing this discussion in another week. So our goal between today and year end is to provide 20 students with field camp scholarships. So we really do appreciate it if we can get your help in doing that. But thank you everyone for joining us. I think it's been a great time to get this exchange of ideas, the exchange of experiences, for instance, from Michael and Miriam and George. I think it's been very enlightening for me. Hopefully it has been for you as well.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jeff, for taking the lead on this, and thanks for everybody for participating. I think we're off to a good discussion that will continue in the future.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Yes,
Happy
thank you,
holidays, everyone.
everyone.